Okay, where we left off in the last video, I was playing with the coloring of this mountain range, right? And I had just done the levels, and then I started to play with the color balance. Now I'm going to go to hue saturation. And the big difference is these blues are so much more intense than the blues of this background. So I can try playing with the spectrum, but you'll see they'll always be intense. Either way I shift it. So the one that's going to make more difference is this saturation slider to make them match. And that saturation seems a little bit better. And now, this sometimes happens when you do big color shifts. I should go back to levels. And I might need to darken my shadows a little bit. Because you see how the colors really changed them. Or brighten my highlights a little bit so it comes more into the foreground. Okay, now I'm ready to try to blend it. So the first step to blending, our main blending tool is just the eraser. Very direct pixel changes here. Especially because we're in a freeware program and we want to use the program efficiently. So we're not keeping a lot of big assets that aren't helpful, which is why we deleted our smart objects, right? So I'm going to use my brush, but I'm always going to, or my eraser with my brush under the brush options here at this arrow, always with a 0 hardness. I'm going to make the brush fairly large, and I'm using a tablet so I have pressure sensitivity to add to it, and to start with at 100% opacity. So I've been showing this to a lot of you individually, but here it is in the demo. So the first thing I need to do to blend this edge and get rid of it so that the mountain blends is to use that 100% opacity and get rid of that hard edge. Completely get rid of that hard edge without erasing the mountain, which can be tough. So sometimes you have to go a little bit smaller. Or I'll show you another technique. Because when you're using a 0% hardness brush, it even projects beyond that circle of the tool. Okay, so to protect the mountain, what can I do? Well, I can use my magic wand with contiguous, and I can select that sky, hold down Shift, and add to that selection until the edge of the mountain is kind of defined. And now when I use the eraser, it won't hit the mountain. You guys see that? So it's a way of kind of stenciling and masking. Once I've gotten rid of the hard edge, which I have, now I can go to a lower opacity. And because I've masked the mountain, I can now do a lower opacity and just go right across it all without worrying about losing things that I might want. And then at that lower opacity, I can start to gradually build up to it. Now when I do that, I can see where the color still needs to be adjusted a little bit. And I'm just going to start it again with levels. Should it go brighter? Should it go darker? Seems like it should actually go a little bit darker. Maybe even limit the highlight just a tiny bit. No. Yeah. Hard to know. Okay, next, image adjustment. Color balance. It's tricky because the whites are almost there, but the shadows aren't. So I'm going to start with the midtones. See if there's any shift there that can be better. Maybe a little bit more magenta in the midtones. Yeah, that helps. Maybe a little bit more blue in the midtones. No, not really helpful. No, not really helpful. So really it's going to be in the shadows where I want to take it away from the blue. And I wish that that wasn't affecting the highlights as much, but there we go. So I kind of changing that color. And this might be an interesting color situation where I need to do more with hue saturation than I usually do. And then with the highlights, I'm going to push them towards cyan and magenta. Okay. Now with hue saturation, I'm going to show you a specialized thing. Because if I shift the whole hue, now obviously that's not going to get me anywhere. And if I take the saturation all the way low, it works, it's just not dark enough. But if I select the blues instead of the master range, if I just select the blue, you can see what that affects. And I'm going to darken, this is where you can use lightness, I'm just going to darken those blues. So they become deeper and more similar to what's around it. Notice how it's not affecting the highlights at all. It's not affecting the yellows, it's not affecting the other colors. It's just turning those blues into dark, dark grays. And if I want to make it more intense and bring a little bit of blue back, I can just by upping the saturation. But let's see what difference that made in our history. So color balance was here, then hue saturation by targeting the blues in the range, I can get it a lot closer. Okay, now if we look, because I lassoed it, the lasso protected the edge of the mountain. But because I didn't have any feathering turned on, that made it all really, really sharp. And that doesn't make sense for a background. So now this is what I do. I use my magic wand, and I'm going to, in the tool setting, set up a 3-pixel feather. Now when I select it, you can see how it kind of hovers. I'll zoom in so you can see. It's actually going beyond the pixels a little bit. And when I hit delete, it's going to project out a delete gradated over 3 pixels. So it's going to soften it, soften it, soften it. The more I hit delete, the more it will project 3 pixels at a time until that edge is a little bit more blended. Now some areas I might need to go in with my lasso and just kind of cut it out. But if I just hit delete without any kind of feather, it's going to be super sharp. Not really going to fit. So even with your lasso, you can set it to have a 3-pixel feather. This is in the background. And that way, I can kind of cut my mountaintop, especially where I think it needs it, and delete, but delete, 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 and kind of soften it. And then hit Command D to deselect. So these are how we get these really refined edges. Kind of cutting out with our lasso or using magic wand, but realize that you can feather and soften so that it feels more believable. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you are the tool adjustments. Because both this mountain and that house, the little Olympus, have some problems. They work overall, but like the shadows could be darker, the highlights could be a little different, and that's really hard to do with overall adjustment tools. So we are going to learn the direct adjustments are under image adjustments, right? They affect all the pixels in the layer or in the selection. But the adjustment tools are here. They're right above the vector tools. Looks like a black lollipop, right above the T, the text tools. They are dodge, burn, and sponge. Let's do dodge first. They'll only affect the layer you're on, but they'll also only affect where you use them, just like the eraser. That's why they're tool adjustments. So I want to affect the little Mount Olympus here, and I want to brighten up some spots of it, but not all the spots of it. So I am going to use the dodge tool, which looks like a black lollipop, and just like the eraser, I'm going to use it with a 0% hardness, with a size that is larger than I need. It's going to affect the midtones, and I'm always going to do an exposure of less than 30. So I'm going to do around 20. These are very powerful tools. I'm going to set my tool to be pressure sensitive, which is that button there if I'm using a tablet. Okay, now, when I hit it, I can brighten it up in certain areas. And you can see it in the history. So I'm just brightening it up in certain areas. And then if I use the burn tool, that darkens it. So again, same settings, less than 30, 0% hardness, fairly large, soft brush, pressure sensitive if you're using a tablet, working on the midtones. And now I'm going to darken within those shadows and those windows. Now, if you dodge or burn too much, like I did, you're going to start to get color artifacts from it because it's going to saturate where you're burning it. So then you use the third tool, which is the sponge tool, and you use it the exact same way, 0% hardness, relative size, a flow of less than 30, because these are very strong tools. Flow's a little bit different for certain tools than opacity or strength. And the mode is going to be to desaturate. So this is like hue saturation, but with a tool. And I'm going to kind of push some of these towards gray so that they're less saturated. Now that roof is really bright, which kind of makes sense. But maybe I don't want that roof to be so bright. I can also target and burn not just the midtones, but highlights. And then burn that roof down. These are photo editing tools. Or if I really want those shadows to be darker, I can burn the shadows. But burning shadows is dangerous because it can very quickly go to solid black, which you don't want. Okay, now I can dodge, and I'm going to dodge the shadows. Like if I want to brighten up that shadow underneath it. And because these are on separate layers still, right? Remember, you still have all your transform controls. You can still kind of move them and set them in. But the better the colors match, the easier that is to do. And then how do we blend? We use our eraser. We get rid of the hard edges with 100% opacity. But once we've done that, then we can use the other parts. There we go. At lower opacities to blend it. And kind of set that in. All right. So I'm liking that Olympus. And now same thing with this mountain. I can use dodge on the midtones, really big because there's a lot more pixels here, 0% hardness, and I can brighten the top of this with the midtones. And then with burn, I can deepen some of the shadows. So these are tool adjustments. But, never burn the shadows, sorry. Never dodge your highlights, never burn your shadows, or you go to black and white really quickly, even at low strengths. So it's always good to start with the midtones. I want to make it a little bit more dramatic. Okay, and then I'm going to dodge some of those midtones. All right, so far so good. Now, I've got those three layers. What's next? This one. Now, in order to change it, I'm going to need to rasterize it. But before I rasterize it, I want to make sure I've stretched it and I've made it look everywhere I, fulfill every need I could think of. So I think that looks pretty good. Maybe